Spirit Caravan was a version of like Wino's band I was playing around at the time. So you definitely went and saw them a bunch when we're getting Dead Meadow together. It's funny, I remember playing an early show with them in Philadelphia at some like abandoned, I don't know, row house somewhere. And their bass player Sherman, coming up all intense after and being like, you guys are not stoner rock. You guys are acid rock. And I was like, all right, okay.
This is Matt Sweeney. This is Matador Revisionist History, and this episode is Dead Meadow with the great Jason Simon. Dead Meadow made a great album in 2005 called Feathers, and it's coming out again on streaming services with a bunch of bonus material and demos that are highly worth listening to because this is a significant album. Fans of Trod Gras Ox Stenar, heavy music, 13th floor elevators, sleep, etc. would do well to hear this record, as well as fans of, I don't know, spiritualized and things like that. Feathers is a really, really great, beautiful, heavy record that occupies a kind of eternal space, and I'm glad that we could talk, Jason and me, about this album. Good to see you, man.
Yeah, man, I haven't seen you in forever. It's been
dude.
A long time.
Yeah, man. I'm sorry about Steve's passing.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah, and that's a lot. That has to be transformational.
Yeah, definitely. It's still in the midst of that,
Yeah.
That transformation for sure.
When I think of Dead Meadow, I think about him playing, and
of course, the band was really him and I, that the drummers were, of course, the drummers were super important, but they just changed over the years, a couple times. So when we had started playing together even 3 or 4 years prior to Dead Meadow, we had a band. So it's like 30 years or something of playing music with him.
Yeah, man. I mean, I'm very, very grateful that you guys have documented your time together because they're great records.
Definitely feel fortunate to have, found him or found him finding me or whatever, that, I think right away, both of us were like, okay, this is what we want to do. Let's figure out how to make this happen.
Where did you guys meet?
Around DC. I went to high school in Maryland, and he went to high school in Virginia. And at some point, we both had punk bands, kind of in the Discord tradition. And senior year, I remember the singer of our band got a call, and he's like, "Oh, this guy from Virginia just called me about playing a show in downtown DC, this little art space." And somehow Steve got the number, I think from this band called Frodis. I don't remember, there's a DC band, two bands, kind of similar sort of bands, Skronky, in like a Nation of Ulysses kind of vein. So that was actually the first time we played a show down in DC that wasn't like a all ages matinee type show. I think there's probably 8 people there, but I thought it was great. A little place called the Arts Lab on U Street, and terrible neighborhood back then. But then after high school, when those bands ended, he was trying to get me to come to Virginia to play with his folks, but we went out and got him to come over and play with the drummer and singer of my high school band.
This is like college age?
Yeah, I was 19 then, or 18 then, I guess. And the band was called the Impossible Five, and it's kind of very DC and like fast and skronky, but we also had this kind of soundtrack, secret agent, James Bond soundtrack type element to all the songs that we were really into at the time. And we did that for a few years. And actually a New Jersey label called Gurn Blanston, I don't know if you remember them. Yeah, they put out our record, somehow had heard it, and we did that with them. And I think Gurn Blanston did like Chisel and like which is early Ted Leo stuff, and then Rye Coalition, that band. And
those guys were hard.
Yeah, so we did that, and then eventually kind of I think we slowly became bigger and bigger stoners. Not Steve. Steve Kille never smoked weed. He drank a lot, but eventually, but never smoked weed.
Really?
Funny.
That's
Yeah.
interesting. Yeah.
It's funny the amount of times he was probably offered a joint or something playing in Dead Meadow. Had to be in the thousands.
I would think so. Also, just his playing bass the way that he did would be so much fun if you were high.
Yeah, exactly.
Like that bounce that he has.
Yeah, totally. I mean, he was always on just, I don't know, his own level. Is in his own world. I think from the get-go.
You mentioned Nation of Ulysses. They seem like they were a ground zero for a lot of bands. Was that the case for your bands?
Yeah, definitely coming up in DC. And I think in junior high and whatnot, I was a metal kid in ninth grade, and then grunge hit. And all of a sudden I was like, oh wow, there's all these bands, these little labels and Sub Pop, but real fat where I was living. In DC, at Discord and Fugazi, and I feel like kind of navigating the 90s when all of a sudden every kid in the high school had like green hair, because Green Day was huge and all these people were dressing like punks. It was kind of like what felt legit or something, and then in the end it came to just bands like Fugazi, and then even beyond that was Nation of Ulysses, which they had such like we're a gang kind of mentality or vibe to them that I think really appealed.
Did you see them live? How were you introduced to the band?
Just going through the Discord catalog, really. I missed Nation of Ulysses. They were a little bit before my time. I came up on the Cupid Car Club time, which is right after, and then all the early makeup shows I saw. But I wasn't as into those. I feel like it took a while for them to really find their groove with that for me.
Well, like the title of the 13-point plan to destroy America or whatever was like I mean that definitely made me pick it up.
Yeah, definitely.
I was in my early 20s in the early 90s when all the grunge was hitting the mainstream, and a friend who was a couple of years older, my friend Clay, who I did Chavez with, was talking about how, so we were talking about that and how that was weird, and then Clay was like, well, when MTV hit, there was a similar thing that happened because you used to like get beat up for like a haircut that you had, and like when MTV hit, all of a sudden everybody had access to a different way of looking and a different way of coding and stuff like that. So there actually was a pretty similar version of something like that happening where a subculture all of a sudden got, farmed out and mainstreamed in this way, and it became, you wanted to find something that was a little more your own, because you already felt like something was already happening. Because the truth is, there's always some version of that happening, I think.
Oh, definitely. Yeah. It felt like that was happening at such an extreme level that like even like the whole notion of like punk, I guess like in high school, and in teen years and puberty, you gotta, at least personally, all this angst and if you're feeling pretty punk, but then that whole aesthetic was so MTV at the time, and was so like half the high school was all of a sudden dressing like this, and so totally. Definitely bands like Fugazi that really were like almost anti-aesthetic, and just like, we're not going to sell t-shirts, we're not going to have merch, did really appeal. And definitely in the 90s, it was, you didn't want to be a poser, that was like the word, just like, oh, I just wanted to be real about this or something, and how that was such a thing that we were like, oh, no posers allowed. Oh yeah. And thinking about things nowadays, with just phones and Instagram, it's like all people do, all you do is like, pose for Instagram or pose that, you're literally just posing, for pictures all the time.
I know. It's wild how it's flipped, and then, but then it's funny. Again, I think about how much shit sucked in the, when I was in high school, like 84 to 88 or whatever, or like those were like high school years. That shit sucked, man. Like every, like sucks. The mainstream culture. Yeah. Like it really sucked. Yeah. I'm not nostalgic for it at all. And speaking of posing and stuff like that, there was, there's always some.
Yeah.
I always get hyped to see that there is youthful energy pushing back and stuff, and actually jumping back to Dead Meadow, how you guys kind of fell into your sound in the milieu that you were in? Because Nation of Ulysses, again, they had a whole sort of built-in thing with a sound and a stance and, sort of politics and distrust of everything and, knowing what's up, just being smart, all the looking right, like all these things that were so important to what Nation of Ulysses was and what all these bands were like. And so then Dead Meadow, how do you come to do that band and that sound?
Yeah, I think through the years when we were really trying to, fit in with that scene in general, I guess, we all, or most of us, became, we're smoking more and more weed and getting into just more psychedelic stuff. At that point, I've been listening to that music for quite a while, and I think the scene in DC could be really kind of insular and like at times hard to like break into in some ways, coming from the suburbs. And at a certain point, I think we just kind of got fed up with it and we wanted to do the exact opposite, and in a way, almost the punkest thing to do at the time was to be like, oh, we're going to sound like Black Sabbath and have 10-minute songs and do guitar solos with wah pedals. And it was in a way almost to like piss off a little bit or go against the status quo, that was going on at the time there. And at the time, Steve and I lived together. We lived together with Cory, who was on the Feathers record, the second guitar player. And he was a huge Hendrix fan, had a huge tape collection of all these Hendrix videotapes and Black Sabbath videotapes. So kind of hanging out just at home and watching all those, and digesting all of that, it became like, oh, that's the form. Like, that's how we should do it. Just a three-piece, and keep it simple and kind of harken back to 1969 and try to be heavy in a way, which was like such a thing that I hadn't really thought about in so long, since I was like in 8th grade, but do it in a way that didn't feel metal per se, that it was like, okay, let's go back to when it was just hard rock, when like Black Sabbath was just starting, and try to do our own take on it. It's funny when I listen to like the early records though, because in our minds, we were going totally against like the Fugazi side of us and doing this 70s thing. And now when I listen to it, I hear so much Fugazi and so much of that in there, but I think it was just so ingrained in us at the time.
The approach, the non-metal approach, and the kind of swingy, bouncy, like really, really danceable, not like moving and staying in your lane type thing. I could see the Fugazi thing. I definitely wasn't thinking about it at the time, but like,
yeah, and I think Steve was always just such a unique player, and he had never gone through any kind of heavy or metal phase as a kid too, so he was coming out of it more of, but he just a love of Zeppelin, a love of 60s music, so really doesn't have any metal in him, and I think, which was cool also, him doing a lot of the art, because aesthetically, it was really like we wanted to move away from black and just like, the metal kind of iconography and whatnot.
It was interesting, like I think it was Jesper from Endless Boogie, who's somebody who doesn't really seek out heavy rock and stuff, was like, man, Dead Meadow, he was on it right away, because that band similar was interested in doing a cool take on heavy music, without being demonstrative, I suppose. Yeah,
definitely. It was such a weird time because there really wasn't anything happening like that. I guess maybe Endless Boogie was into a similar kind of thing, and there were a few bands kind of into a similar sort of trip, but there wasn't any sort of scene. So we either played with post-punk bands that we didn't fit with at all, or we would play with like heavier metal bands, like Spirit Caravan and shows like that, but either way we kind of didn't quite fit in with them.
Yeah, and it's funny because that band, the Obsessed, have a there are things about them that rhyme with what you were talking about as far as being the punkest band on the scene in DC playing.
Oh, definitely. Yeah, we Spirit Caravan was a version of like Wino's band I was playing around at the time. So you definitely went and saw them a bunch when we're getting Dead Meadow together. It's funny, I remember playing an early show with them in Philadelphia at some like abandoned, I don't know, row house somewhere, and their bass player Sherman, coming up all intense after and being like, you guys are not stoner rock, you guys are acid rock. And I was like, all right.
other, defining thing of Dead Meadow is definitely the vocal approach in melody and in flow. It's pretty singular and really works well.
Yeah, that was the first record I think that we started kind of moving away from just riff based stuff, or trying to get more into some more, song type songs, or just not feeling so tied to being like, oh, this is our thing, we got to be heavy, and I mean, now it sounds heavy, plenty heavy enough, but I remember it was even like a concern at the time, like, oh, is it heavy enough? Is it?
Fantastic. I wanted to ask, is the song for Stacy Elevators reference?
Oh yeah, that was for Stacey Sutherland.
Yeah.
And yeah, Cory and I have always been a big fan, and I love his guitar playing, and it's cool reading that book, the 13th Floor Elevators book, and you see how he really was the band leader in terms of the music, in terms of like putting the songs together. How on Easter Everywhere, Rocky and Tommy would write the song, but then Stacy would take it, basically figure it out, teach it to the band, and then reteach it to Rocky how it's going to go.
Because Stacy Sutherland, he's so underrated, and like the songs that his songs are so cool.
I love Bull of the Woods. That record. People overlook it all the time.
Actually, what the fuck? I know.
Yeah. I think it's great. It's the first one I got into, oddly enough, and then went back and got the others.
It's a singular record. It's super, super cool. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And
it's a good word for it.
My friend Mark Moore, who played in Cat Power and a bunch of other bands, but he was a really sick guitar player and music head, and he was like all about Bull of the Woods, and how does Stacy take on things and stuff.
Yeah, such a cool guitar player, because he's so Texas blues, but yet equally like so cosmic and so far out. Somehow I can do both those things.
Well, I feel like there's elevators in there, but it seems like you were really on some shit there.
Yeah, I mean, definitely really into the elevators, and I think obviously I can't sing anything like Rocky, so the Stacy songs did probably appeal to me because it's more in a realm of being something closer to what I could sing like. And I think with vocals in general, I never sang before the start of Dead Meadow, so I feel like it was a couple of years. It took a minute for me to like figure out what worked and how to sing or what I could do or what I like to do. And I feel like, I mean, even now I probably feel like I just figured it out a couple of years ago. But the whole process of doing that. But I think by Feathers, I kind of was more comfortable, of like, okay, this is what I want to do. And I remember at the time we were really into Wu-Tang too a lot, so there was like some songs that I was like, oh man, just kind of like Let It All Pass or something, where it was almost like, can't rap or anything, but I just did want this like constant flow of lyrics, in our own slow moving way.
Yeah, it's effective. And also, it's also the kind of the big themes, like the songs are all these kind of big theme English folk level, like classic, you're taking on the big subjects, in this very comfortable, non-grandiose way.
Well, yeah, for that Such Talk Such Hounds, that one, it was kind of definitely an idea of like, oh, I'm gonna try to do like a ballad type song, like a traditional ballad thing, see if we could fit it in there, and I always thought that poem, like Three Ravens or something, I think it might be called, was always pretty cool, and yeah, it seemed fun, from pretty early on that that Harry Smith folk anthology, of course, and like reading through all the ballads and kind of just getting into how much these songs have changed over the years. It seemed cool to try to do something in that tradition, add something to our own version of an old story.
Also, by the way, the bonus thing was cool.
All those extra stuff. Yeah.
Well, I listen. The extra stuff is great, but then I noticed on the current thing, it ends with that great drum loop.
Oh yeah, and then at Sleepy Silver Door.
Yeah, and it's just listed as bonus track, but
yeah, because I think at the time, we didn't know if we quite had enough material, honestly, and we had done this just for fun, this live version of that in the studio, and we were like, this is pretty great, but we also, already had it on another record and didn't, and wanted to keep it as the main version, and keep the ownership how it was and everything. So yeah, it was just, let's just stick it on the end of the record, And
it's really, really cool. I loved it, also because like. It's a nice because that riff is like one of the all time great riffs,
Right.
and it's a great kind of acknowledgement of like we do this. This song rules. like I thought it was very cool.
Yeah, and I think at the time too, we were like, I don't know, is it like we were actually concerned like if there was enough riffs, if there was heavy enough,
Right.
And then having done that, you were like, oh, we could do this, try to put this on there or that, but then having done that version, we were like, oh, we'll
Just do that.
just stick this on there,
Yeah.
put that at the end. It's funny there's been times when people at shows would be like play Untitled, cheering for that song, not realizing, just thinking that was the name.
That's really good. The demos are really cool as well, and they're fun. Again, going back to how the lyrics, the arrangements, and how the lyrics flow over the parts.
It's funny because we were really, having been a band that most of the songs are based on like riffs, for earlier on. We were a lot of like, okay, we have this part, and then we go to this riff, and with this one, there were more like chord bass and some different kind of stuff, but we were still in that mode where I'd have the music and then I'd write the lyrics. So trying to put those songs together, eventually, it's kind of hard to do without the lyrics, so we had all these different versions, where it's hard to know it could go to this chord or this chord, like, well, let's try this chord, and it almost got kind of crazy in a way because not having the song there, and like all these versions sounded good, but we were just
Right.
playing them over, almost overworking them to a point. And so hearing that stuff again, those earlier versions was kind of interesting because you're like, oh wow, it was cool way before we got to the end of it. We could have stopped anywhere
Totally.
along the way, I think, and it was fine, but we just tried all these different ways, trying to make it the best it could be.
Where did you track that record?
The actual record at Loho down
In New York.
remember that?
Yeah, man. Yeah, that
We
place
came
was
up
awesome.
here and did it.
Yeah.
And I think we were suggested a couple of producers from Matador, and we went with one of Bob Ebling.
I never worked with him. What was it like working with Bob Ebling?
I think it was kind of the end of his time in New York, and no one knew at the time, but he was dealing with some drug issues and whatnot. So
Sick.
we worked with them, but there was a lot of time of him just kind of in the lobby, sleeping and nodding off. So it's mostly just us in the studio, and a really good engineer that we worked with later on for some other stuff, Tom Glody, who actually I think did more of work on the record or the tracking of the record. So
Classic.
basically us in Loho, and we did everything live there in the studio at first, and then when we brought it back, Cory and I weren't so happy with a lot of the guitar and the sounds, and it wasn't big enough or as lush as we wanted it to be. So I think pretty much all the bass and drums were kept with what was done live, but then a lot of the guitars we ended up doing back in DC and kind of really working on figuring out how to layer it up correctly or how we thought it should sound.
Was that a fun process doing the guitars that way, or were you like, oh shit, we have to fix it, or like, cool, let's go?
Yeah, a bit of both. You just I guess it's always great when everything live, when you get it right and everything just sounds great. And that that's the way that the first two records were.
Mhm.
The first Matador one, we had changed drummers right before, and we weren't really in a place to like go in and like bash it out live and like rock through the songs in that way. So it was much more of like a layered up affair, and it's always more work. It's nice when you have it all together live, but I feel like for Feathers it really worked out well. And it's funny because I'd come in like one day and spend all day or all night with Steve recording it. Steve really engineered all of it in DC, and then the next day Cory would come in and do all the guitars all night or all day, and then I'd be like, wait, what's he doing? Well, that's crazy. Like that doesn't work. Or sometimes it would work, but then I'd have to be like, okay, well now I got to add this over top, or I got to change this, and eventually, it definitely became like a pretty dense, as Cory was saying, in a quote, almost like murky sounding record. But I think that's kind of what's cool about it, that it does have this like real thick feel of a lot of layers with it.
Yeah, but it worked. I mean, it's not overwrought, and all the layers push it. They're not like static.
Yeah. When we came to mix it, we brought it up to New York to mix with Bob, and he had a setup at his apartment that we went to, which I think for him was a way just to be like, okay, this way I can make more money.
Right,
And
totally.
but it worked out well, because he would just kind of set things up, and then we could be kind of hands on with it. He would go lie down on the bed and go to sleep for a while, and when we were just mess with it and and change things around and try to get it to a good place. And it was pretty crazy mixing over there. I remember the building next door, I think, caught fire at one point. I remember going up to the roof and watching this building burn next to us.
What street were you on?
It was kind of it was in Brooklyn. Oh, where was it?
Whoa.
And then at one point, Bob decided he needed more money to finish the record. So I didn't even really know this, and like Cory and I were kind of dealing with our own drug stuff at the time in New York and whatnot. And but so Steve Kille was really the business guy handling most of the stuff. So he went with Bob to Matador, I guess got some cash from them. And then we got back, and Bob all of a sudden just grabbed like some luggage and like left and went out the door. And, like,
that was it.
Yeah, we were like, what? And he got on a plane and I flew back to Detroit to go into rehab. We were at his apartment. He was like, my friend's coming over, he'll help. Like, what? Yeah, it was wild. And then his friend came over and helped.
Is it on a computer? Are you working on a hard drive at this point?
Yeah, this was all working on it was in Pro Tools at this point. And he had a bunch of outboard gear there, so we're going through all his rack. And his friend came over and went through it. And so some of the other songs, he's like, oh, we got to fix this one. It's out of phase. He fixed some stuff like that. I think we had maybe like a song and a half to do or so. Amazing. So, finished it. And then Cory has a memory of like him and I coming up and like going to the studio to start to remix a couple songs. And like Steve freaking out and being like, stop right now. But I can't remember that at all. So I'm not sure.
Drum sound is really, really good on that record. Like
yeah, it's really cool. I agree.
What was going on with that? Do you recall?
He always had a really big, like 20, what would it be, 26, I guess. And there's no hole in the front head too, so you really hear that like
so
it's
almost closed.
Marching band style. Yeah.
Closed with nothing in it.
Yeah.
It's
pretty cool. It's interesting too how you almost hear like, I don't know if it's the bottom snare mic or something, but you hear this kind of like extra like snare like through a lot of it too, and it works, but it's interesting.
Yeah, it works really well. And then also McCarty, it was a really cool drummer, and like he was really onto something, the sort of Dead Meadow roll, the Dead Meadow bouncy thing that he really did, especially and then with that big kick drum sound, total thing.
No, definitely. And Feathers, he always had a cool feel right from the start. This kind of like laid back, like really solid, almost Charlie Watts kind of like to him. And I think Feathers, he like when he first he wasn't used to playing like in this like heavy band though. He's more of like a Ringo Starr, Charlie Watts style drummer. And drums and Feathers are great, but it was after Feathers that he all of a sudden like hunkered down in the basement and just became this like monster. When you see him like after that, when he's doing these crazy drum solos and all the insane fills, and he just became such a beast. And I think it was because there was some issues, with like playing along with a click and stuff that was just tricky on that record for only for a version of Stacy's song that wasn't even used. But something about that made him like be like, I'm gonna hunker down, I'm gonna woodshed and like practice all this. And because for the next two, for Old Growth and a live record, Three Kings, he's crazy. He's so good. I've actually been playing with him a bit recently.
No way.
It's been fun. Yeah, he's been coming over and jamming.
Fucking A.
Great.
That's great news. That's really exciting. I was going to ask, I swear to God, my next question is like, what the hell is he up to? Because nobody plays like him, and he's really, it's a really, really, really good sound. And I don't get why more people don't just have the, I think that he occupies this really, really fun to listen to space that
totally.
somebody like Jim White does. It's a totally different thing, but also just similarly knows how loud drums are and knows how beats work and stuff, and
yeah, definitely.
You know.
And he got really good too later, like about like not playing the drums loud, but not the cymbals loud. Like really controlling the volume in a really good way.
Yeah, totally. That's great news. That's awesome.
Yeah, totally. I don't know. I don't think like we've been jamming a bunch, and I'm trying to get him to come back and do some shows and stuff. But like I think with his family and with that, I don't think it's going to happen for getting him out on the road or anything, which is a shame because we've been playing for like a couple months, and it's like, oh, but man, it sounds so good. You're such a great drummer.
Maybe you can make it. Well, maybe you can make it work. Just do shows around.
Oh yeah.
Around his schedule, that'll be fine.
Exactly. And I definitely want to do something with it, like whether it's just working on a project or recording or some special kind of show here in LA, to do something, because it's been really cool to reconnect. Because when we split, like after Three Kings and the original drummer came back, kind of lost contact with him for a while because we just were on tours that were too long and everything, and everyone gets crazy with each other.
Of course, I know how that goes. Yeah.
But he made these cakes for a while, these vegan cheesecakes.
They were insane.
Yeah, you saw them, right? They were amazing.
Those are insane. Yeah,
they blew up. They were like, wow, like like in all these magazines. And
I saw that it got like super huge, and it was like a total thing, and they were really beautiful.
They're amazing. And I think like finds each ingredient. Like all the, even let alone how they look. Like you really look at each one, and they're all like hand done. But it's a hard price point then, for people, especially nowadays when things are tougher, I think.
No doubt.
Because it is the amount of work he's putting into it, to make it look like that. So it's definitely worth all that. But
that's so sick. That I'm really glad that you guys are playing.
Yeah, it was really good to reconnect.
Yeah. I'm still thinking about about Bob and the producer and that whole element.
it was wild, and then like honestly, Cory and our time at the time too, we're dealing with like similar issues, and so it was just like a crazy situation in New York, and getting it all done, and then the building catching on fire next door was just kind of like with everything else, it was like, oh my god, and like, and this is supposed to be like the more sane record, because of like us just deciding to be like, oh, we'll just record ourselves with Shivering King, not really having any idea how to record a record or anything, So Matador was like, okay, you guys, we need a producer, we need to focus, and it was just like kind of mayhem behind the scenes,
Yeah, let's get a producer to really keep it on the track.
Yeah, it's pretty wild, and I was like, wait, what? He's leaving?
So then, did you tour that record extensively?
Yeah, we did. Quite a bit, actually. I remember at least a couple U.S. tours, and I feel like we were always touring back then. If we weren't recording or something, usually a couple times a year we did that, or Europe, and they're pretty. They're fun, but it definitely was like some pretty rough ones, at the time.
Going through that particular set of circumstances and then going out on the road, I can imagine could be fairly unhinged.
Yeah, it definitely was, but never. I don't think it got too crazy, or we weren't not like super wild partiers. Maybe more like quietly partying. we weren't like like it's not, the band's not too crazy and wild, So we kept it together, for the most part. And then I guess, Cory did a few tours, and then wasn't really up for touring at the time with everything that was going on. And so he kind of faded out of the picture, which is tricky then trying to figure out these songs with one guitar player, how to like do them, because for a while I just like, I could just hear the other, like I could hear what they were missing, for a number of years. I remember Matador set us up with some band, or no, maybe the booking agent set us up with some band called Jennifer Gentle that was from Italy. And they were like a real Sid Barrett type band. And they did the whole U.S. with us, and those guys were ragged by the end of it. And because I don't think they like stream from Italy, and they're probably never doing like a 5-week tour, across playing all through the Midwest and the South. Like, I think that they were just like how big America was, and how much of it there was. They were just torn up by the end.
So
we were too, I'm sure, but we knew what to expect.
So you got to watch a bunch of Italians basically wither on the vine.
Yeah, totally. By the time we're coming to the South at the end of the tour, we're playing Kentucky or something.
When was the last time that you put feathers on and rocked it?
Um, hmm. I guess it's been a while. Yeah, I think maybe, probably within the last like 2 years. I think there was a reissue that Steve did. So around that time, I think that was 2019 though. So now that's like 6 years ago, which is crazy with
I
lockdown
know. Is
time
that weird?
flies.
It's clearly it sounds super fresh, but it also I was curious about the time and place that the record got made, and especially hearing the Bob stuff is really funny, especially considering that, like, does anybody get into these situations anymore when they're trying to make a record these days? I feel like maybe you don't. Things don't get that complicated anymore.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't even know how record. I think for a lot of times the record's made before they're even like, a label's even talking to them or something. Like well, let's hear the record.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, for sure, for sure.
yeah. Or just having to go to a studio. Okay, what studio we want? To go to. Thinking of like we're going to go to this place, or now we're just especially being in LA and knowing it's like riddled with studios. I have one in the backyard, or just like but like how many places that are you could track on or anywhere. With the way gear is nowadays.
The time and place elements that had to take that had to happen in order to make an album happen even 20 years ago was still pretty significant, particularly if you're if you're making the kind of music that you guys are making, which is documenting a loud live band, right?
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, I think there are still that's fading in general from music. I was just talking that the idea of like we get together and make this music together at one time. It's something that I think happens less and less. Or even things that are bands. A lot of times it's like, okay, here, add some guitar to this, or add that. People are passing things around or sending them. And it just is so different. Because you're not reacting to each other, or you're not in the same room playing off each other. It's definitely something that you can't really recreate unless you're all in the same room together.
Yeah, it's interesting, and definitely something that probably both of us have done more than maybe the average musician these days, which is that like what you do is dependent on what happens together in a room and what that sound is, and kind of everything that goes along with that.
There's a lot of organization that goes into getting to that place, but when you do it like that, I almost feel like it's usually less work, in the end, because if you get it right and you have that something happening, then it's already there, and you can add to it or figure it out. But when you're trying to just slowly build up something that's and get it to have some kind of vibe or feeling to it, sometimes it's like takes forever.
Yeah, no, man, a certain kind of organization that needs to happen in order for everybody to get in the same room. And there's that saying that covers a lot. You know what I mean? That's everybody having that's having a place to go. That's everybody knowing each other in the first place. It's everybody having the same set of values maybe beforehand going in, and so then a social structure that already existed, and all these things that lead to once you're in a room, it should sound really good, and it probably will, and then you won't have to do much to it, as opposed to having to retrofit everything.
I know it takes forever.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like with like, I think Neil Young said the same thing about like the first record, right? Where it's just a cool record, that first Neil Young record, but after that, it was like I think it was like so much work that he's like, oh, I don't want to do that. I gotta just have a band.
Totally.
And it's also so much more fun. That's why you do it. Because you want to make music or create, have this group of people that are together that do share a certain aesthetic vision, and then those are the bands that you love, and like that they were, because they came together, becomes something bigger than the whole.
Yep.
Which is, what's magical about it, or what's cool, why you do it in the first place, really.
Yeah, for sure. And it's interesting, like the further away you get from that, the suckier and more boring stuff gets, I think.
Definitely.
And
yeah, because when you record something, like it doesn't even matter how it's recorded, cleanly or like on a boombox, but if it's people playing together in a room and having that magic, it doesn't even matter. It's instantly something that you want to listen to. Like
yep.
Like all this trad grass stuff, where it's just like it does sound like it's recorded on whatever, a 2-track somewhere in the back of the place, but it's super enjoyable to hear because it's people making music together.
Yeah, and the band that you mentioned, Trad Gras Stenar,
Exactly,
spelled, which translates to trees, grass, and stones, were this Swedish group that is so fucking great, and like anybody who they're kind of like Velvet Underground level great, where they kind of fit your head a little bit, right? About how to play together, and like they existed at the same, in the late 60s and early 70s, and like for sure, actually, it was funny. Like I don't know if Dead Meadow was aware of Trad Gras when you guys were doing it, but I definitely felt. I would imagine Jesper must have put you onto them, right?
Exactly. That's what I was going to say. I became aware of them through Jesper. I think early on, he gave me a stack of like CDRs he had made with like, with kind of like Xerox covers that he had made and stuff, and a bunch of great stuff, Trad Gras stuff. Still have a bunch of them around, like this Jessie Mae Hemphill one.
So
all
good.
The time. She's the best. There's one, a Chris Thompson one I remember I really liked, which is like a British folk guitar player I'd never heard of, like pretty obscure. I still can hardly find that record around.
Yeah, I don't even.
Jansch kind of vibe.
Chris Thompson.
Yeah, it's really cool. Definitely in that, like a Burt Jansch kind of British folk kind of modal. But really cool.
Yeah,
record,
I would have thought, it's funny. I would have thought by now that Trad Gras would be more, like kind of a touchstone, but I still feel like people haven't picked up
off
on
the beaten track a bit. I saw them. They came through LA and played Zebulon, and
yeah, that was awesome.
I think it was like the Dungan guy was playing, maybe the lead.
I think he was involved, and then there's a young woman playing drums who was amazing, who was super sick. But again, that was a minute ago. That was a while ago.
Totally. It was lockdown. It's like it doesn't feel that long ago, but then you realize it was 6 years ago. Or like
I know
we haven't seen a little bit, not so much now, but when like after like, oh, I haven't seen you in 4 years. It's crazy.
Yeah, like I mean, we officially lost what. Really, like officially, like 3 years just gone. So,
I know.
And we have to accept that like anything that happened in there may as well not have happened, which kind of sucks. But you got to move on. Like it's like
so
definitely.
Trippy. But also, it was kind of like a cool time in a way too that like will never come again, probably, or in some ways hope not. But like it was also like being at home, having this much time at home, and just I basically learned how to record and built a studio and did so many projects, did a bunch of records. So
yeah, that's totally true. I guess what I mean to say is that the things that could have existed if that I guess I was trying to do in that downtime, it's like they just never existed. But then for sure, the kind of sink or swim aspect of it definitely, again, like going back to the transformation through loss and just having to reimagine your entire world, is a real thing, and something that we're lucky that we get to do it as much as it fucking.
Yeah, well, I think there was an
painful.
element of like, feeling like, in a normal before that, I feel like, oh man, I got to do this and that. I'm supposed to be out. I can't spend all day doing, staying at home working on this one thing. But then you all of a sudden felt like kind of like those days after Christmas before New Year's, those like you're just where it's like almost like, what else am I going to do? I might as well
totally.
Watch this tutorial for an hour and a half on some feature of Pro Tools I never understood or something. Like there really was time to be like just get into whatever you wanted to, and in a way that you didn't feel guilty about not taking care of responsibilities because you couldn't, you were supposed to be at home like that. So
it's like if you're not going to learn something new, then what the fuck, like and then but then it's also like you learn that, and then also you learn that time still with that idea of like lost time, that that time is all we got, you know what I mean? And
definitely. I mean, I felt like Dead Meadow, even by the start of it, had been around for a long time, but it never felt that long to me until like lockdown really, because then all of a sudden like when you stopped and like really like kind of had this break and like looked back, you're like, oh man, it's been a lot of years. You
Yeah,
know, all
that's
of a sudden
wild,
it
huh?
felt kind of like older. So you know, it felt like you really felt how all this time that you spent on it because you had a chance to actually step aside and like look back at it. You know.
It's a trip. I'm excited about to get to talk to about the Dead Meadow Feathers record with you, and I'm really excited to hear that you and McCarty are jamming. That's really
Yeah, that's been cool. I've
really
been playing with
cool.
Cory as well, you
Oh,
know.
that's great. That's great.
So
What up
yeah,
to
because
Cory?
we did have an idea of like trying to figure out, you know, I wasn't sure whether to keep going with Dead Meadow or not, you know, because it really was such a partnership with Steve, you know, and
Hmm.
uh, you know, and of course at first, you know, I was like, I don't, you know, I don't know, but I do need to keep playing music. I don't know what else I would do, and having spent all this time, you know, years, finally, you know, building this up to something that I can do that with. Uh, I do want to keep playing, but the idea of maybe doing a two guitar thing, just instead of just having a new bass player, so you know, it just would make it a little bit easier on that, you know, because there's no replacing Steve really, and you know, it's going to be something different.
That's I agree with that, and also I wanted to touch on one last thing, which is that Dead Meadow is one of the great band names, and it's also a great. It's a space, you know, like it's and I think that you should definitely stay in Dead Meadow because it's a you know it's a mindset, it's a space, and it says so much, and it's a big theme. You know what I mean? That you could always that's endless. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I still feel there's plenty to explore within that theme. You know, there's still
For
different
sure.
aspects of things in your mind, or that, and it is open enough too that you really can, with staying with the because it's the feel of it. You know, you can go in different directions and without it sounding like, oh, you know, you totally changed or something. You know, it still feel
No,
like Dead Meadow.
yeah, man, Dead Meadow is definitely a great space, and
Yeah, thanks. Yeah.
I'm grateful for it. So thanks for making it. You know.
Yeah, no, of course. Yeah, I don't know what else to do, you know.
Yeah, I
So,
feel that. Me neither. But
yeah.
it's very appreciated, man. So good
Oh, no, thank you.
good hanging, man. And I'm
Yeah,
glad that
great
we
to
get
see you.